All right, so we're going to open the second session of the workshop. I want to introduce Nina briefly before we open it up. I think I met her 10 years ago in 2014. So she and I, we've been attending same conference. The conference, I tend to think that is my home. So it's impossible. I mean, for me to imagine, it used to be impossible for me to imagine to have like her here in Korea, but apparently I came a bit earlier than you. So I came back from Europe and having her with me, and this is first event that we, as a European conference on network learning, to host something and try to do something in somewhere outside Europe. So her being here has symbolic value or meaning other than anything. But having said that, I want to just briefly introduce her professionally. So Dr. Nina Bonderup Dohn is a professor of education and IT, and she's also associate chair of the Danish Institute of Advanced Study at the University of Southern Denmark. And she's also member of the university climate cluster. That's interesting. I didn't know, so good. So she also served as the head of the Center for Learning Computational Thinking and the research program entitled Learning, Design, and Digitalization. So Professor Dohn received her master's degree in philosophy with a physics minor. So we'll see what she's going to offer today. And subsequently, she got the PhD in learning theory and also Doctor of Philosophy in educational philosophy. There's a lot of philosophy going on there. Great, yeah. So she's a philosopher. So Nina held multiple teaching positions since 1998, and she has received a teaching prize in 2004. So she's a basically good teacher, so we are so lucky to have her here with us. So Nina has contributed to more than 59 books, it says here, as the author or editor, including those recent ones, Creating Design Knowledge in Educational Innovation and Developing a Didactic Framework Across and Beyond School Subject, and Re-theorizing Learning and Research Methods in Learning Research. And the last one with my little contribution as well, so Phenomenology in Action for Researching Network Learning. So as you can see, she has a variety of experience and expertise in both research method, but also teaching. So it will be I can't wait now. So without having further ado, shall we give her a round of applause to welcome.
Thank you, first of all, Kyung-mi, very, very much for inviting me here and bringing me all the way to Korea, to your lovely country. And we're so happy to be here. And thank you all of you for coming. I'm very excited to discuss with you. And thank you to the people participating online. We've got about 5 people online. Yes, and I will be asking you to do some exercises where you discuss in groups. So I'm hoping that you're in charge of the Zoom room, that you will put them in a room where they can discuss online with them, between them, that they can be a group, that you online can be a group. Yes, that's the idea. For those of you joining us online, you probably don't know that we had a workshop ahead of this one, but most people in the room were part of a workshop before this on using AI-generated imagery in data collection, if you're okay with me putting it that crudely. And this, my workshop actually follows on completely after that, because my question is, how do we use interpretation, or when is interpretation involved in analyzing data? And this could be data from the collected in the ways the previous workshop was about, but it can be data collected in many other ways. So basically what I want to do is introduce different levels of interpretation, explore when are we using interpretive methods and which kinds, when is interpretation involved. We'll start with actual interpretations of data. And then I'll say that's that one level, and we'll spend quite a lot of time on that. Then I'll discuss strategies for analysis, methodological approaches, research objectives, and what you could term the general understanding of what the researcher's predicament in being in the world with analyzing, trying to find meaning in the world. And then after that, those are 5 levels at which interpretation is involved, is my claim, and in different ways. And then I'll say something at the end of about the logical relationship between these levels, and a short bit about common misunderstandings about interpretive methods. And then we'll be tired by then, yeah. Okay, but we'll start with the level of actual interpretation of data. And I have brought you some data of my own for you to analyze. You can't see them yet, but you will there will be a tiny URL for you to access them, so you need to use your computers or tablets or whatever. These are data from a project I did some years ago on homework online. And homework online was a way of offering an online homework service to high school students, and voluntary university students acted as tutors. And you can see it's some time ago because the interface here is not, it looks old, right? But try to abstract from that and think that you have the tutor here, that's a university student. And, this is the student that is, yes, that's true. You have the university students here, a small picture, and the webcam is off in this one. But the student calling, the high school student, could turn on the webcam, and then that student would be here. And of course, I've blurred the picture of the university student. And they have a whiteboard that they can collaborate on, they have a chat they can collaborate on, and they speak with audio if they want to. And it's up to the student calling which of the media they want to use. So this student has decided not to have the webcam on, but to use the chat a little bit, but basically mainly to speak orally, and to also use the whiteboard. And this service was offered for free for the students and for the high school students, and the university students were not paid; they were voluntary, but they got a party once in a while. So it was a nice setup, and the idea, it was a one-on-one. So you would call in saying, "I have this problem in my English class. Can you help me? I have an assignment for tomorrow. Can you help me correct my spelling mistakes?" Or something else. Well, they probably, but something around the structure. This was before generative AI, maybe not so necessary now, but then there would be other questions. That was the setup. And now, starting off, I'll ask you to, I've taken 5 excerpts from these, from the studies that I did, and they're transcribed, so it's only text. That's also for privacy reasons. I can't show you the actual videos that were taken. And I'll sort of ask you to, I don't need to make the groups, but I'll ask you to discuss in groups of 4, and then it says here that I'll assign excerpts to each group. I actually think it's easier if you just pick one of them. There are 5. Pick one of them and discuss your expert in the group. How would you interpret the expert? Write down 5 points. It's a Google Doc. So you can just write in it. It's open for you to write. And just below the excerpt, write 5 points are these for our group. You don't need to put your names in, but because you're more people than 5 excerpts, so you will be choosing some of the same. It doesn't matter. It's just important that you look at them. We don't discuss yet. I'll tell you afterwards what I was looking for, and there's no right and wrong here, but this is to illustrate how interpretation is involved in data. So please form groups of around 4 and pick one of the excerpts. Read it and discuss what you notice in the excerpt. Yes?
Was the student socially marginalized student, like who are in the kind of poverty or something?
Sorry?
The student, the high school student.
The high school student.
Was the student like socially marginalized?
No, this could be any kind of student. That's a really good guess. The original project was about marginalized students, but it was open to everyone. But thank you very much for asking, for making me make that explication. Thank you. Okay, I can see you're still writing, but I think whilst you're still writing, I will proceed a little bit, and because I can already see where some of what the points I want to pick up on, and so that's the point of me seeing it. So I will continue from here. Now I'm going to tell you what my idea was in what my research questions and what I was interested in here. And so my research questions was, how are students positioned in particular interactions on homework online, that's what I call HO, homework online, the platform, and how does this contribute to the opening and closing of their opportunities to learn? And how do the different affordances of homework online's communication tools affect the positioning process? And I can see some of the notes that you're making. Those are also kind of the things that you find interesting here. How are the students, how do they interact with the tutor? Is the tutor leading, and how are they, is the tutor reinforcing with praise or comments, or are they, and how do they, is it yes, no questions that they're answering, and how do they get around with the digital tools that they're using? But I was using, more specifically, I was using what is a special theory that's called positioning theory, which is focusing on opportunities to learn. And positioning theory really shortly in this version that I'm using focuses on, it's from Greeno, and he focuses on systemic and semantic positioning, where systemic is the agency or not that the people have, and the semantic is whether they are engaging conceptually or just by following rules, which he calls disciplinary, which is weird because it means many things, but by disciplinary semantic positioning, Greeno means that we are positioned to just follow the rules of the discipline without engaging with the concepts. So my interest was whether these different kinds of positionings were possible with all of the different affordances of chat, the oral and with the webcam, whether some of them were only, whether I only saw some of them in some of them. So I was interested in that and how the communication opened or closed the possibilities to learn for the students. And so I selected my data. I had 25 sessions in all, and they were all recorded on the screen, but I didn't transcribe all of it. I looked specifically for trying to find out, looking at the different kinds of communication options. So the chats, when they only chatted, when they only spoke, and when they also used the whiteboard, to see whether I would find all 4 kinds of positioning. You can see there's semantic and systemic, so and there are 2 kinds in each, or they're continuum, but 2 poles in each, that makes 4 possibilities. So you can have agency for the students in terms of concepts, you can have agency of the students in terms of following the rules, and you can have the students be passive in terms of the concepts, that means the tutor explains, or the student being passive in terms of following the rules, means the tutor explains how you follow the rules. So those are the 4 possibilities, and I was looking to see, can I find them all with all of the digital tools, or are they only present? Can I only see them in some? And I was expecting that in the chat you wouldn't have the agency with the conceptual, but I actually found that as well. So one of my pre-understandings was that chat was too narrow. It took too long time. They certainly didn't get as far with just the chat, but it was really interesting that I was able to find chat situations where the tutor would position the student to be agentic about explaining the concepts. And also, on the other hand, when they orally, I also found all 4. So even though they had the chance to speak to each other, they still, and the tutor could have been positioning more agentically, there were also situations where the student was positioning only to listen to the tutor's explanation as passive recipient. So in my the specific interpretations I was also the specific interpretations I had of these 5 excerpts. I'll just tell you really quickly. The first one, the one that was also where the screenshot was taken from, the student is positioned as competent and with conceptual agency, and that is my understanding. But I've noticed that some of you pointed out that the tutor is actually only asking yes/no questions. I wasn't looking for that, but you're absolutely right. So even though the student is positioned with to explain, it is still sort of asking questions where there's a yes or no answer. That's interesting. That wasn't part of what I was looking for, but you found something else in my data, right? In the second excerpt, which is also from the same session, those of you who read it, you will have seen that there's sort of that there's a mistake made by the tutor, and so this makes this mistake that the tutor is making is initially positions the student as competent and herself, the tutor, as not so competent, and the student picks that up and says, "Oh, but this fault also, I make this mistake all the time," and that makes the tutor really uncomfortable, and she giggles uncomfortably because, as you also note, some of you, there's an asymmetric positioning between tutor and student. And even though we're trying to position the student for agentic conceptual engagement, still the tutor is expecting to be in charge. So that when the student is saying, "Oh, I make that mistake all the time," the tutor experiences that as inappropriate. So that's why she's giggling. You can't hear the giggle, but it's not the kind of "I'm happy" giggle. It's kind of the "this is inappropriate" giggle, the cringing giggle. And so in this way, that we see that in this excerpt, even though they were the idea was for the tutor and student to be on par and communicative and collaboratively build knowledge, that's not the system that is happening here. So that's what I looked at for the, oh, sorry. And in the next excerpt, I was seeing that, which was happening a chat in Google Doc, I was seeing that the student was positioned as a recipient of a disciplinary explanation. The tutor simply takes over and explains, actually falsely, because he hasn't actually inquired enough what this is about to understand what the student is asking, and he's saying something that is false. But I mean, you can't see that in here, but that's actually what's happening. So he should have positioned the student as more agentic here. And in the fourth excerpt, you see a positioning as competent disciplinary agent, so that the student, which is also in a chat where you have as an example of the student being the one asked to explain, but just explain following the rules, but still the tutor is not taking over. The student is actually getting agency here. And in the last excerpt, we have the tutor exhibiting his incompetence and doubts, and not being being scared about it. So to begin with, there's a rather symmetrical dialogue between tutor and students, because the tutor himself is saying, "Well, I actually don't know. I have to Google this," but then the student is waiting for the tutor to Google it rather than do it herself. So it's all within an overall storyline of the tutor being in charge and the tutor being the one to find the answer and help the student. So it's not as collaborative as it might seem in the beginning, and then from line 2 in the excerpt, the tutor positions himself as a competent agent again, and the student as someone to explain to. Now he found the answer. Now he proceeds. So these are different ways of this positioning happening really intricately in the communication, without, of course, student and tutor thinking about it. And I wanted to share this with you because it helps us in thinking about how, I could see from what you were pointing at, you were looking at some of the same things, but you were more perhaps interested in the digital tools in a different way than me, because you come from a different background. So this shows us something about how the background we come with. I was explicit in having positioning theory as my background, but you have other backgrounds, and even if you're not thinking about them, they're there with you, and they help you see, or they have an influence on what you see in the data. And now to get that a bit further, this is where AI comes in here. I'll ask, please take the excerpt that you just read and feed it into Copilot or ChatGPT or Gemini or whichever generative AI you prefer, and ask it to analyze that excerpt that yourself were looking at from a positivistic perspective, from a constructivist perspective, and from a feminist science and technology studies perspective, and see the 3 different answers you get and think and discuss in your group how they align with your own interpretations and how they align with your understanding of these theoretical perspectives. Have you all had a chance to look at the three different? They're very different, right? And also very different from what we were talking about. And now, of course, I don't know exactly what the generative AI gave you back. I mean, if you feed it, I've tried this several times with the excerpts, and I get different things and different foci every time. So once I got the focus was on objects of knowledge within the positivist. This time it's not, so everything I can recognize the positivist and the constructivist and the feminist essayist perspective, but I'm not getting the same. So I think this shows us different things. It shows us that generative AI can be a really good prompt for thinking about different ways of looking at your data. Especially if you're not aware of having biases in your or being influenced by a specific perspective, asking ChatGPT to or another generative AI to provide different from different perspectives will help you realize that actually what you thought was obvious maybe is not obvious. So that's one way. It's also a way if you're not quite sure what to do, then sort of what do I think actually makes more sense in terms of what I experienced myself when I was there? What resonates best? And then you can explore that. Then you start from there. What you shouldn't do is take this and use it, and that's it. But it can be a nice trigger for your own reflection, I think. But it's also important to notice that I also then asked it to do a chart where it was comparing the three perspectives. And by then it gets so general that I can't recognize my excerpt in it. Because then it focuses on, for example, the meaning of errors in learning, which from a positive point of view is a failure, and from constructivist view and feminist SAS is part of the learning process, a natural part, and we are fallible, and so that's true, but that's not really what was in the excerpt, and certainly not from what I was looking for. So I think it's also important to note that it can help you in thinking differently, but you have to do the thinking. It's really not enough to have it compare the perspectives from you, because it will then get so general that it's not really about this data anymore. At least that's the experience I get with it. So I'll proceed from here. I'll just sum up on this level. As you remember, we are talking. Oh, sorry. Did everyone in the back also hear me before? I'm sorry, I forgot the mic. I'll take it from here, but could you hear me in the back? Okay, good, I'm glad. Sorry about that. As you remember, I'm talking about 5 different levels at which interpretation is at play, and this was the first level. So summing up on that, when we have different frameworks or perspectives, that leads to different results. That's what we've seen both with ChatGPT, but also with the initial, I had my positioning framework, which made me look at different things than or somewhat different things from what you were looking at. It's not surprising that you found some of the same things, also because you're trained in educational science and technological studies, so which I'm as well. So we have some of the same background. And we can deliberately choose a theoretical framework. That's what I did with the positioning theory. But even if we don't, we still have a pre-understanding. I didn't ask you to look with a specific background, but you still have some pre-understanding of what this would be about the communication between tutor and students and about digital tools. So even if we don't choose a theoretical framework, or even when we choose a theoretical framework, will also still be influenced also by unacknowledged pre-understandings. So even, it's not that I chose positioning theory, but that doesn't mean I don't have unacknowledged biases. It just means that I know I look with positioning theory, but I don't know what else that is behind me that I'm not looking, that is also affecting what I see. Are there any questions so far? Yes?
Do you think would it be okay to control the whole data to the AI?
No, I wouldn't. I don't think it would be okay to upload all the data to the AI. And when I've done it myself, I've always used it within the secure environment. But the thing is, these excerpts have been published and they are in open access site. So in that sense, Google already, the generative AI already has precisely this data. That's why I think it's okay to ask you to do it without it being in a secure environment. But I definitely think that if you're working with your own data, you should only do it in a secure environment where it doesn't get out. And even then, be careful about it because there are still leaks. Yes?
If we could be a bit more specific in making the prompts, just that.
Yes.
Like, if we can be more specific to that, those kind of particular questions, like if they could ask, like, what would be the analysis from a constructivist perspective in relation to like GPD or something?
Yes, that would make it much more useful. The reason I didn't ask so specific questions was to see how does it approach it at this very general level. But you're absolutely right. If you ask it very specific questions, even the comparison it will do may actually be helpful for you as a starting point. I still think you have to do the analysis from there to be really engaged with it and get all the meaning out of the data. But you're absolutely right. Better prompts can help also across the. But again, when you do the better prompts, then maybe that is done from a. Then that will be more from one perspective than from another. For example, asking about the significance of errors. Even asking that is already presupposing that there's a critical answer to that. So the way you phrase your prompt is also has your own pre-understanding of what is important. So what you get, that's no problem because it will get you what you want from the perspective you are interested in, but it is still sort of, we need you as the analyst to find out what is really important in the answers you get back. Okay, I'll proceed? Yeah. Okay, the next level is what I call strategies for analysis. And the choice of the strategy we take in analyzing our data, it affects what becomes visible in the data. So, and what do I mean by strategies? Well, some examples are conversation analysis, where you have focus on making the conversation happen. The turn-taking between, in this case with homework online, turn-taking between the tutor and students. How do they collaborate in making conversation happen? What happens when they're quiet? How do they then take on? There is in one of the excerpts where the tutor is Googling but hasn't said that she would do that. Then the student starts saying something because she's not aware, she can't understand why the tutor is not saying something. That's something that's sort of a conversation analysis example. And so if that was done in home, that's not what I did, but if I had done that with my data, then I would be looking at how conversation evolved as a collaboration between the two, without asking the questions about positioning, but simply looking at the turn-taking. And you could also, another example of what I call a strategy for analysis is multimodal analysis, focusing on how different modi and media interact to create meaning. Had I done that in homework online, I would look at how sense is made by the tutor and by the student with words, pictures, text, and drawings. And actually what Natasha was, her workshop before this was very much about the multimodal analysis and also asking participants to do multimodal analysis. What do you see in this picture? So that's what you would do with a multimodal analysis. Another example, or further examples of strategies would be discourse analysis, where you typically focus on power issues, and that's what I did, because positioning theory is one form of discourse analysis, focusing in this case on the symmetries and systemic positionings of the agents in the conversation. So that's the strategy of analysis that I used. You could also have a phenomenological example or a phenomenological strategy. What do participants experience? That's not so relevant in this with these specific data, because if you did that within the homework online case, you would want to know how the student and the tutor experienced the session. But I can't see that directly in the data, so I would definitely have. Maybe I could see something in the data of how that comes out in the conversation, but I would definitely have to have some interviews also with the students and the tutors to validate and also validate my results with them to find out whether I actually got their experiences, since I'm not expressing them directly in the session. And then the last one I'll mention is what you call the narrative or meaning condensation analysis, which in the case of homework online would be, for example, the full sessions, the excerpts are taken from different sessions that are much longer than this. And so a narrative analysis would be of the full session. And I actually worked together with a master student on this project, and she did, she had research questions of her own, but she did a narrative analysis of the last excerpt, the one where the tutor says in the beginning that he's not really, that he doesn't quite know and he'll have to Google this. And she did her analysis of this full session is that the student goes from being unsure and guessing, though actively participating, to being able to formulate clearly and precisely what she has to do in the last task. And there's a turning point at some specific place where she wants to write down what they had found out with the correct numbers, because they've mostly calculated with letters. And when she does this, some questions arise, but it is also here that she realizes what she has to do and she becomes more sure of herself afterwards. So that's an example of what a narrative analysis would be. That would not be at the minute level of the excerpts that I gave you, but at the full session. So I'd like you to consider, discuss in the groups you were discussing before, a project you have been involved in, and discuss with your group, do you approach data interpretation with a particular theoretical framework? And if you do, how does this affect your data selection and analysis? And if you don't, consider how your disciplinary perspective and perhaps work experience might supply unacknowledged pre-understandings. Which kinds of strategy for analysis do you use, and which tools for analysis do you use, and how do tools and strategy align with your potential theoretical framework? And just discuss this between you sort of for the next 10 minutes, 5, 7, 10 minutes. Let's see how far you get. Okay, that was 7 minutes. I think you sound as if we can proceed from here. Yeah. Are there any questions now? Or comments? No? Saving them? That's fine. We will then proceed to the next level, which is what I call, or you could call the methodological approaches level. Now, the field of qualitative methods within which interpretive methods belongs is very often characterized as specific methods, for example, doing interviews and observation and text analysis. And when you say it's qualitative methods, you mean certain approaches, phenomenology, hermeneutics, grounded theory, social material studies, interventions. So these are two levels, but actually it is much more complex than that. There are more levels involved in this. So the specific methods, that's the way you gather the data, and certain approaches are the way you analyze it, but it's also, that's both the strategies for analysis. It's also a question of a higher level of the methodology. What is your more not just the strategy used for the specific analysis, but what is actually your approach to the way you're going to use your strategy? And this is the next level that I'll talk about. So methodological approaches, they differ on the overall role that interpretation is accorded in bringing about of data, and in the kind of interpretation involved, which entities are we talking about, and on the role of the researcher. And I'll give, I think it's 5 examples of methodological approaches and how the roles of the interpretation and the kind of interpretation and the role of the researcher is specified within each of those. There are more approaches than the 5 that I have time to go through, but they sort of, they show the larger landscape of how different approaches the approaches really are. And so the first example of what I call a methodological approach is phenomenology, where you focus is an understanding the life world of the participants. Now you will maybe recall that in talking about the strategies for analysis, I also talked about phenomenology as a strategy for analysis, where you're interested in finding out what the experiences are, where you're analyzing to find the experiences. That is at the level of your data. You're looking to see the actual experiences. This is the level above that where you're saying, what am I actually interested in? I'm interested in understanding the life world of that's why I need the experiences to get to the life world. So that's why this is at a higher level from the data. Sorry? Ah, yes. Nina. Yeah, and Nina tends to speak really fast. Yes. Especially when she's excited, and she's so excited to be here. Yes. I will try to slow down. Yeah, okay. So in phenomenology as an approach, your interest, your focus is understanding the life world of participants. So the participants' experiences are central. It's their sense-making. That is what it's about. So interpretation is focused on their sense-making. So in the only way you as a researcher introduce interpretation is to get at to bring the sense-making of the participant forth. And you also have, then when you have done that, to ask the participants, do you agree? Is this what you meant? So you're not interpreting beyond, you're only beyond the life world and the understandings of the participants. You're interpreting to get to the understanding, the sense-making of the participants. So here, the researcher's role is, as it's often called, bracketing your own understanding, not come in with your own understanding of what is important, but look at what the participants find important. So if I had done that in the homework online case, I didn't, but if you wanted to do a study like this in the homework online case, you should ask the students, for example, about the role of homework online in their school life. How important is this for you? Does it help you? How does it help you in your class? How does it help your self-efficacy? How does it help you feel aligned with learning? That kind of questions. Getting at understanding what homework online means to the students. That's not what I did, but that would be an example of a phenomenological study of homework online. Another approach is hermeneutics, where your focus is understanding the meaning of a text or a practice. So you're not only interested in what the participants think themselves. That's one kind of data, what the participants think. But you can use theory, you can observe them, you can have their explanations, and all of this act together to inform the researcher's interpretation. So here, the researcher is the one doing the interpretation, not just to understand participants, but to understand the broader meaning or the full meaning of the text or practice. And the researcher utilizes what is often called the hermeneutic circle, where the parts they sum up to the whole, but the whole also the whole gives meaning to the parts. So that you will say, oh, okay, the participant said that she was a bit concerned after, not in my case, but I mean, a participant could say she was a bit concerned, and you have knowledge theory about psychological reasons for being concerned, so you can interpret her concern with the theory, and then ask perhaps a participant a further question, and if that then doesn't fit with it, then you change your explanation. So you have to work around, and so, but on the other hand, also your theory will also maybe say that, well, she hasn't realized this herself. So maybe I have a data where that doesn't fit, but maybe I can explain that because she isn't conscious of it. So that way, the hermeneutic circle helps you to make a consistent whole of your data, which may include negating or reinterpreting some of and not taking it at face value. This is sort of what I did in the homework online case, because I was working with I was observing the interaction myself, sitting next to the tutor. And I had some theory with positioning theory, and I also talked to the students informally about to the tutor informally about their experience, but I didn't do interviews with the tutors, and I didn't do interviews with the students. So I could have had more data at play as well, but basically my approach was hermeneutical because I wanted to get the further meaning of the positioning of the students in these different interactions. A third approach is grounded theory, where your focus is on explaining a practice phenomenon theoretically, but without starting with the theory, where you build the theory inductively from any available data, but only data, not theory. So you build it inductively from any available data, and then you do iterations of deductive tests of the theory. So you come up with an initial theoretical explanation, and then you go out and observe again and see, does this fit? No, not quite. I have to change my theory a bit. So that's why it's grounded in data, but you build it up to theory. And so the researcher builds the theory from scratch, uninformed by known theory. It's okay to have an explorative question. So theory does come in because you usually don't start asking questions like what kinds of sock colors are participants wearing, because you have a pre-understanding of this not being important, right? So we do have an understanding of what are important questions. And so theory does get in behind our backs a little bit, but we try to sort of keep it out and build up only from the data. And so interpretation here is where there's not an interpretation in terms of theory, but it's on how well the theory we're building up, how that fits to the data. So that when I go out and try again and try to do my iterative rounds, then when I get new data, I see, do they match? No, they don't. So I do interpretations of my theory and the relation to the data, and that's where interpretation comes in, but in a different sense of interpretation than in hermeneutics, where I actually interpret the text for its meaning. Here, it's just to see whether we can find a match between the theory we're building up and the new data we get. And if I had done that or if you wanted to do that with the Homework Online case, you could iteratively build up a theory of, for example, the mediated learning communication, how the learning communication was mediated by the different tools. So you would do repeated observations of how chat influenced the communication. You would have then maybe build a theory around my initial idea that chat would be too narrow or to not have communication channels enough so that you couldn't really get deep meaning in there. Then I found that it actually did. So I could try asking, well, more deeper questions. And so that would be building up a theory around the mediated learning communication from scratch and going back. That would be one example. The fourth approach that I'll mention are socio-material studies. That's the kind of study that Natasha was involved in her previous workshop. It could be actor network theory or social technologies, science technology studies. So STS studies is double, so it's just the ST studies. Well, anyway, and the focus here is description of practice practice occurrences as emergent. What happens when humans and technology are together? Which emergent understandings and which occurrences happen? And you're describing those practice occurrences as something that is coming out of as Natasha said, the fusion of the humans and the technology in the situation. And so you need detailed data on human and inhuman actants' behavior and treat them symmetrically, at least within some of the social material studies. And so the researcher will then describe behavior and emergent constellations of events and meanings and power and practice. And the interpretation will be descriptions as a sort of not working, where you point to the different elements in this emergent constellation, or to emergent occurrences of assemblages of the human and inhuman actants. And and Natasha's work is really the best example of how doing this. I'm doing this, I'm giving a short presentation, so I can't do complete justice to all of what's going on. But an example within Homework Online would be analyzing the Homework Online assemblage, how assignment and Homework Online platform and student and tutor, how they interact to constitute a specific materially realized task solution. So that would be one example of how you could go about with a social material focus to the Homework Online case. Don't you agree, Natasha?
Yes, I agree. I think that's great. And I can just add, if I may.
Yes.
I think I referred to that in the presentation, so it perfectly matches that we can go on and continue. So I was talking about kind of more softer or weaker approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Materialism or stronger, or how people describe it harder. So that means that you can either focus on this symmetrically or still have some distinctions that actually acknowledge some asymmetry.
Yeah. So I'm giving more the sort of the hardcore, and I'm doing that to, as I said, paint a landscape of different approaches. So I'm not taking intermediate positions. I'm taking sort of the full positions.
It exactly aligns with A and T, with ActionNet, or perfectly like the harder ones and with post-human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. And so the last one I'll mention is intervention, for example, design-based research or action research, where your focus is understanding practice through changing it, and typically changing it for the better. You don't just want to change it, you want to make things better, right? And so you'll do experiments in practice. I've put that in brackets because you're not taking them into the lab. You're actually doing it in practice, and in practice you can't, that's the whole idea. You can't what's it called? You can't get the variables with, what's it called? Nils? Yeah, you can't control the variables. That's what he's saying in Danish, but I'm saying, yes, isolated. You can't isolate the variables. That's the word I was looking for. You can neither isolate nor control them. And so your experiments will not be what a positivist would find an experiment, but you're experimenting in the sense that you're trying to introduce something new and finding out what's happening. So in that sense, you're experimenting. You will typically do observation of what happens, maybe also participate in it, so it might be participatory observation. You'll look at practice documents, for example, students' assignments, and all of this will inform the interpretation by researchers and practitioners. So you typically collaborate with the practitioners to find out how can we make sense of all these different kinds of data, of what is happening, and how can we make sense of the practice we have and of the practice we're trying to get, and how that shows the barriers we weren't aware of in the existing practice, and how can we develop that to get further to the practice we want. And so the researcher will initiate or co-initiate the intervention, participate or observe it, and negotiate results with practitioners. That's the role of the researcher. And I didn't do that, but actually when I was doing my study, a colleague or two colleagues did a design-based research study with the participants as well. So we had two interlocking studies. And what they were focused on was development and testing of tutoring strategies for practice together with practitioners. So they want, you can see my data show that some of the interactions are not as, they could be better. So that maybe, and it's no fault of the tutors. They had no education. They were students and had not been educated as teachers. But maybe helping them have teaching strategies that were developing some teaching strategies which didn't require a full education as teacher, but which could be implemented in practice to help them better their communication with the students. That was the idea. And to do that together with the practitioners. That would be an example, or that was an example of a design-based research, an intervention study. Now, the next level is, what is this all about? What is the aim of the research? Why are we doing this? And there are basically 4 different types of research objectives. One is to describe. That is the aim of many, and again, I'm putting this too crudely, but the aim of social material studies is, in the first instance, simply to describe how the assemblages, how meanings emerge through the assemblages in practice. Whereas grounded theory studies that I explained, their aim is typically explanation. Other approaches can have these as well. These are just examples of what the different, will remember that the grounded theory studies wanted to explain a practice phenomenon, find out why is this happening? Why is learning communication taking place in this way through these tools? A third aim is understanding. That's the aim of phenomenological and hermeneutic studies. You want to understand your participants' experience, that's the phenomenological one, or you want to understand, and their life world perhaps, or you want to understand what is going, the practice, what is going on in a broader perspective in using theory. That's what I did with the positioning theory. I wanted to understand how students' learning opportunities were affected by the positioning that was happening in these interactions. And the last aim is changing, as I said, for the better. We don't just want to change, but changing. And that's the aim of intervention studies. And one variant of that is emancipation of the participants. That's especially within action research, originally at least, action research is not just about changing practices for the better. It's about helping participants becoming empowered in their practices and to be allowed to take on responsibility, political responsibility in their practice and in their society. But not all intervention studies has that focus, so that's a variant of it. Now, again, I want you to consider a project that you are or have been involved in and discuss with your group which methodological approach you use and what your research objective is, and how does your approach and objective align with your analysis strategy and the tools you use. You will remember in my homework online case, I was interested in understanding how the learning opportunities of the students were affected by the positioning through the tools. So that's why that was my aim, understanding. So that's why I chose a hermeneutic strategy and did positioning analysis of my data. So that's the alignment in my case. So please discuss with your, again for like 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 5 minutes. And then we'll have the last level and at the end, but 5 minutes. Yeah, it's on. Okay, thanks. I think we'll proceed from here. And I don't have that many slides left, but these are the difficult ones. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Is there a relationship of inclusion or hierarchy?
Yes, I'm going to call the relationship between the levels, right? Yeah, right. Yes, that is not the next slide, but the slide after that. So there are only 3 slides left, but these are the difficult bits. No, the 2 next ones are the difficult bits. The last one is not difficult. Okay, because this is the last level, which I call the researcher predicament level. That's sort of the question of how are we in the world? How do we build theories? What is the relationship between our theories building and the things in the world, the phenomena in the world, where you can have, this is where you often, when you're talking about philosophy of science, people will say, oh, that's a positivist stance, or that's a hermeneutic stance, or that's a phenomenologist stance. These are these stances at a very highly abstract level. Those are the ones I'm talking about now. And they are, of course, interrelated, and that, as I was just saying, is the next slide. Not this one, but the next one is how are these levels that I've been talking now about, how are they interrelated? But one example of the researcher predicament level is hermeneutics as a description of the relationship between person, world, and articulated understandings. So not hermeneutics in what we were talking about before, the method finding of the hermeneutic circle, finding fit between our data and the overall understanding. But as Gadamer said, we are always already in an understanding. I'm always already understanding the context I'm in. And it's only when it's breaking down for me that I start building an understanding where I use the hermeneutic circle. Right now, I'm in an understanding that with all of you, that you are here to participate in a workshop on hermeneutic, on interpretive methods. But if one of you raised your hand and asked, why are you wearing Teva sandals to a university lecture? That would be sort of, things were breaking down for you. This is not normal. And it's not, and there's a completely horrible story about my luggage being lost. That is the reason. But that's not what we're focusing on. But that's when things break down. So you start asking for why is this the case? But in the outset, we are always in an understanding of each other, is what Gadamer is saying. So the hermeneutic circle is ontological. It's about a way of being. That's how human beings are in the world. We understand the world. It's not methodological. And actually, the title of his book, Truth and Method, was intended as a joke, because the point is there's no method, because we are always already in the understanding with truth as sort of the goal. But that has been completely misunderstood. People are referring to Gadamer as hermeneutic method, but it's not. It's about the human's predicament in the world, that we are understanding beings. That's the point. So we have a pre-grasp of the situation. We have a prejudice, but a pre-just judgment about this. And we approach the question and the text, if we're reading a text, with questions based on our pre-understanding of it. And what we intend when we meet a text or practice, what we hope for is a fusion of horizons between the text and practice, the way things are done, or what the meaning of the text or the practice is, and the understandings we come with. So we want to develop our own pre-understanding to fuse with the understanding that the text is showing. There are this is one example of, that's one stance at this level, what I call the researcher predicament level. Other examples would be constructivism, not in the sense that we construct knowledge, but in the ontological understanding that everything we understand, we all construct in our minds. Ontologically, you are all figments of my mind. In the extreme case, the solipsism, that everything goes on in my mind, and even when you say something, that's just something in my mind. And the reason for this is that it all has to, that I have my own understandings, that whatever gets to me has to be fit into. And so the next step is to say, well, how do I even know that there's something outside giving me this? Isn't it all in my? And von Glasersfeld within learning sciences is an example of someone who actually took that stance ontologically. Most constructivists only take it within learning sciences, only take it epistemologically, saying this is how we build our knowledge, and methodologically in trying to access people's understanding. But von Glasersfeld is an example of someone who actually proposed the solipsist view. Another stance at this level is social constructivism, represented, for example, by Jean Lave, where it's not all figments of your mind, but we all, in our social practices, construct meaning, and it doesn't make sense to ask of any real world existing outside of that, because even that question is asked within the practice. So if I ask you, how does the world outside our social practice, how does that interfere with our practice? That is a question within our practice, and your answer will be an answer within that practice. So it's all constructed within the practice. There's no way of getting out of our practices to the real world, and the real world can't get in. So this is in a sense, it's actually just the social variant of the solipsism. This is a practice solipsism. It's all inside our practices. Then you have pragmatism with John Dewey, where the focus is on truth and as that which that works in practice. That should be understood not so crudely, but it is what matters in practice that shows us what meaning is. So something that cannot be connected to differences in practice is fairly meaningless. That's the point of the pragmatism. So so it's much more focused on the practice. It's not about building understandings. It's about what actually can make a difference in practice. And the last example I'll give, there are more stances, but the last example I'll give is what is called the realism or critical, and I'll mention the critical part of the critical realism version of the realism. And Peter Reimann is a theorist within learning theory who is a representative of this view. I am too, but that's sort of to the side. Roy Basker is the one who has developed it. The idea is taking seriously that we understand the world through our practices, but the argument is that our practices only make sense because we understand there to be a world outside of our practice. So when we in natural sciences, if we do experiments in the lab, that's because we're thinking that there are some phenomena that represent actual mechanisms in the world, and those are the ones we're trying to find. So so the critical part of this is saying we know that we only have the understandings that we're able to build within our practice, but the point of those practices is accessing a world that goes beyond our practices. So that's the realist part of it. Now, these were examples. I'm not going to ask you where you stand on this, but I'm going to proceed to the logical relationship between levels. But do you have any questions right now before I do that? No? That's fine. Okay, so what I've done here is a bottom-up presentation starting with the actual data and the interpretation and the strategies levels and the methodological approaches and the research aims and the researcher predicament. That's because I am hoping that that makes much more sense to you than if I had started talking about Gadamer and the title of his main work being a joke. I think that would have been far too abstract. So my belief is that this facilitated learning. But the subject itself, the logic of this whole question of interpretive methods is the other way around. That's top-down. So there are inherent thematical relationships between the levels, starting from the researcher predicament level and going down. They are relationships, they are constraints. There's no determinism here, but there are constraints on them. So that if you take a hermeneutic stance, the Gadamer, we are understanding beings in the world, then it makes sense to take a hermeneutic methodological approach, not as method, but as participatory, because you want to understand, you want the fusion of horizons with your participants. And so to do that, participatory hermeneutic approach would be relevant. So, you would, for example, do a narrative analysis at the level of strategies of analysis. The full-blown, not sort of the minute looking at data, but what is the meaning of the full thing? Because you come with your questions and your pre-understandings, and you see how the full session, how much sense that would make. And you would typically do ethnography or interviews as ways of approaching this. But as I said, there's no determinism. It's not that you can't use a questionnaire here, but you really have to think about how are you going to get to a place of fusion of horizons through answers in a questionnaire. But it's not that it's impossible, but you really have to think about how you access how you build the fusion of horizon through that. And now taking a social constructivist stance, the Jean Lave, it's all in our, it's all, we have the practices and meaning makes sense within the practice, and that's what, there's no way of talking about what goes beyond. Then it makes sense to do socio-material studies, or also taking a hermeneutic approach as method to find out what is the understanding and what is at play within this practice, to understand the practice. And you could, for example, do multimodal analysis or discourse analysis, and based on interviews, observation, cultural probes, or image-elicited discussions. This fits, in my view, really well with what Natasha is doing. Pragmatism, if you sort of have the understanding that what matters and what makes sense making is a question of what matters in practice, then you would often do interventions or experiments, so that you would try to find out what happens, where are our hidden barriers. By trying to change practice, you find the hidden barriers. Or you could also have the hermeneutic approach as method, trying to observe and put together the pieces. And you could do abduction or narrative analysis based on experiments. You could include think aloud tests or eye tracking if you're looking at digital media, but also observation, questionnaires, workshops, or interviews. So you basically have a wide range of, I got too far, but you have a wide range also for the pragmatism. And within critical realism, you would often do interventions as well, and experiments and observation questionnaires and workshops and interviews, because you basically want to find ways to make reality be able to talk back at you within you. So, and very many student projects lack consistency between these levels. You'll find people saying that they have, that they take a hermeneutic stance, but then they will be doing something that actually fits better with some of the other methods, and some senior research projects as well. Yeah.
Natasha mentioned that she sometimes asks participants to think aloud when she reads, when she asks the participant to read the visual resources. But still she...
that's not what the think aloud tests that I'm referring to here are the ones where you're trying to find out how people navigate a specific tool. So you ask them to say, oh, now I'm trying to find the website for this, and I'm doing this. So it's more for the kind of analysis of what goes on the screen.
Yes, and can I just add to that? Because I think this is very useful, because I think it explains the leading approaches and ideas in perspectives. And then you mentioned that sometimes students might choose one, but then not acknowledge maybe, and then use another, because I think certain things can inform each other.
Yeah, definitely.
So usually, I think that's the bottom line. And I think that's a great question, and I think it's great now to consider this, that if we combine certain things, because I do think that certain things, I mean, obviously you could not exactly combine that easily, like positivistic and kind of socio-material, but then certain things here, such as socio-constructivism and socio-material, I would commonly combine with pragmatism and critical realism in certain ways, but I need to acknowledge that.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to really say your positionality, because otherwise you're making yourself vulnerable to criticism.
Yeah.
Because people would say what you're doing, you're positioning yourself here or there, and then explain where the things actually connect and why and how. And that's very important, and you're quite right. I was doing, for example, think aloud interviews with images, that were actually trying to find different things, among other things how people work with, like, let's say, Google Images or maybe generative AI, but also through the process, you're trying to describe certain things and also answer things such as, understanding, because previously you were talking about, for example, descriptions, understanding, etc. So you can actually combine description and understanding, but be very clear about it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying here that there are constraints, but there's no determinism. And I would never ever say you can't do X, because I've seen people do X and do it really well. But I've also seen a lot of people do X and do it horribly. And so, as Natasha is saying, be careful when you combine and be really explicit about combining. But I just had a master's thesis where they combined critical realistic stance with a lot of different theories from the most positive to the social material, and it was incredible. It's the best master's thesis I've read for a very, very, very long time, if not ever. So, and they got a prize for it as well. So that's fair enough. so it's just an example of saying it can be done, and I'm not saying you should stick to one of them, but be really careful about the constraints and argue for breaking the constraints if you do.
I still have.
Oh yeah. You had. Sorry about that.
Sorry about the time. My second question
do it
is
quickly.
about that you didn't mention structuralist view and post-structuralist view. Do you consider it as a hermeneutic stance?
Overall, yes, I would say that, but I think they could be allowed to have their own stance. Yeah, I think it would. I mean, if you want to push them into one of these, then it would be pushed into the hermeneutic. But since it's not, since they come with a specific understanding of structures and the importance of structures in a way that is not present in the hermeneutic stance overall, then I would rather have them as the sixth example. And as I said, there are more examples, but we had 2 hours, so I went through 5. Yeah. Kyung-mi, you also look as if you're going to take over from here.
No, yeah. Is it the? Do I
That's
have
this
another?
one, but we common misunderstandings. Well, we can save those.
Yeah, you can just.
I mean,
go through it.
this is not the hard one. We went through the hard ones.
Yeah, I think probably a couple questions to clarify some of the things. So I think if I were one of the students here, I think I would be really curious where I start from.
Yeah.
So with the level, how do I know my philosophical stances? And then when it comes to data level, we're all gonna do interview pretty much, I think, unfortunately. And then so where I'm gonna start, how I know where I'm gonna start and then define myself as researcher or my project, and then make alignment between those different levels.
That's a wonderful question, Kyung-mi. There's no easy answer to it. I think in terms of what works in practice, it's an iterative process, and you probably start somewhere in the middle. So you shouldn't just start with, well, it depends. I mean, a lot of what Natasha was explaining was actually quite data-driven, not in the way that data scientists would call it data-driven. I see a lot of theories at play in what Natasha is doing, so I'm actually thinking she is starting in the middle, but I'm pretty sure that she would say she's not. So this is going to be a discussion we can have. So if you take some specific social material stances, you will say, well, let's not make any presumptions. Let's follow the participants in practice, see what happens. That's what Latour did. But of course he had, from my point of view, he had understandings of what will matter in practice. What he was not, he wasn't observing the color of their socks. He was looking at how they interacted. So he did have understandings at play as well. So, and I think, but that's also because my research is theory driven. It's not data driven. So, and I think it's a misunderstanding to think you can bracket your understandings, because they're always there. And you can maybe be explicitly aware of some of them and try not to look that way, but then there are others that are also there. So from my point of view, having the researcher predicament understanding that I have, I think you should start in the middle, because that's with thinking about, well, how do I actually, what is my main approach here? And what am I interested in? What's the focus of my study? Am I interested in the life world of the participants? Am I interested in how assemblages emerge am I interested in questions beyond that? So I think starting from there and going up and down and seeing whether that fits together.
All right, that's good. And then we can move back and forth and
Yeah, that's the
figure
iterative
out, like
thing,
make
yeah.
the alignments better. Another question I could probably ask is that my understanding of your presentation is all about how we interpret the data.
Yeah.
And then you have actually, you're suggesting that there are different approaches to interpreting data according to the purpose of our research. And then you put the 4 different, starting from description to all the
Yeah, the
change.
aims.
So you had the aims 4 of that. However, if my students are coming to me and then just with the descriptive narrative, I think I would feel like it's not theoretically fully done yet.
But that
Do you
depends.
know?
That
so-
depends on what they've described. Because I think what the social materialist studies are doing is very much. Well, it depends on which ones, because some of them take the criticality as a starting point. But the ones like Natasha, that sort of what do participants actually do here as a starting point? And that starts with a description. You saw her slide. I was actually thinking maybe I should the slide where you sort of go from the micro level to the macro level is exactly what I've been describing here. So it depends on what the descriptive question is.
Yeah.
If Latour basically did a descriptive study of, or have done many, but his Science in Action and his laboratory life, his early works, are descriptive studies of what researchers do in practice.
Can I push you one more time though? Because without understanding phenomenon, how can you describe it well?
Well, that is the question you have to ask Natasha, because I'm not the one who's data driven. I'm theory driven, so I don't think it's possible. I'm on your side here.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that if you take that stance,
Yeah.
I have to accept that there are other researcher predicament stances than my own.
Okay.
And when I accept that, then I have to accept that following actors and actants in practice and finding out how they assemble and how practice occurrences emerge is also something you can ask for.
So now, having heard that, can I say that probably there are different aims, interconnected. However, one particular aim we can foreground, and then the others will be the background. I mean, we still understand, describe. However, we want to change it. So change itself is foregrounding, and we are going forward to that. However, we still want to understand, describe, and communicate with other colleagues.
So sorry for just jumping in. This is
Good.
such an important conversation, and thank you for opening it up. For example, I always go beyond description, like always, because I'm also not that particularly happy. For example, one of the biggest criticism of multimodality research and even socio-material is so what?
Yeah,
in
exactly.
terms of like, what's the understanding? So what I have tried, and done, hopefully, in some of my work is actually trying to be really mindful in terms of focus, what I can combine. So one example is, very briefly, I don't want to take too much time. So I looked at the conception of lecture, like the lecturing performance as a socio-material kind of conceptualization of a lecture. And so what I did, I combined this socio-material approach to data collection, and then I interpreted the data doing 2 steps. So one was more kind of informed by understanding the trends and what's happening in those videos of lectures, and then another one I was very deliberate and purposefully chose Goffmanian approach, which is very particular theory that talks about the body and the role of bodies and the body idiom that are actually there in interactions and how we are driven by different kind of situations and how we are presenting ourselves, because lecture is all about presentation and presenting ourselves. So this is, for example, just an example how you actually combine the descriptions of the data with something very understanding driven, which is okay. Here is the lenses, so I call that the lenses. So I use the lenses of Goffman's body idiom, and then we added the term that we developed, like thing idiom. So it's not just bodies, it's also things, because this microphone, we literally talked about the microphone, it mediates the experience. And for the capture lecture, it's so important that we are well heard. In practice, proven. And then you can theorize, so why are things such as the display so important in the lecture historically? So you look at the, theory from more kind of sociocultural and historical perspective to understand the data. Is that a good example?
That's good. Yeah, I think I just wanted to make sure that we're not going home and like students are understanding that it should be either one or the other, and then they'll be freaked out. So I think one more question that I wanted to address today is that about this particular thing about coding. I know the coding. You know how to coding.
Yeah,
coding the data.
Coding the data, and we're not talking about programming.
So
because
human,
coding means different things.
No, human doing the code. So we do. So often the students are almost equalizing the analysis of qualitative data with coding.
Yeah, that's why I've tried to say that there are so many more levels in it.
Exactly. Can you just kind of make it that more clearly stated?
Yeah.
So that would be
actually one of the slides I took out because I thought there wouldn't be time was more about the tools we use, where coding within Vivo would be one step from between the actual analysis and the strategy level, because the strategy level is going to tell you what am I looking for. Are you going for a conversation analysis? Are you going for multimodal analysis? Are you going for a phenomenological analysis? That's the level we're talking about, and you have to decide on that before you start coding, because you have to decide what you're looking for. Am I going to code for whenever it says something about technology? Am I going to code for whenever it says something about emotions? What am I coding for? So the coding is a step, is at the actual data interpretation levels. But as I've been arguing, the four other levels are put constraints on what you can actually ask at the coding level. Clear enough?
Or we don't have to do coding.
Or we don't have to do coding. But you asked about coding, so I wasn't, okay.
Thank you. But this is a beautiful way of interpreting.
Yeah, and can I say, I didn't code as such. In my homework online, I didn't code because I was looking, as I told you, for specific questions to be answered. So I looked for those and I picked my data, the ones I transcribed from that. And I didn't need to code because they were I was asking, are all of those four possibilities of positioning, are they present in all of the three modes of communication? And that's what I looked for. So you could say that the coding was done by myself internally by focusing on those transcripts, but I didn't need more coding after that.
So in that sense, it's kind of a hint. There's some kind of hint of what is it? Positivist like approach, but a hint of.
No, it's because it's so theory-driven, actually. So it's the opposite, actually, because my approach is so theory-driven by positioning theory that I'm looking for specific examples, in this case, of that kind of positioning. So no, it's not positivist. That would have been,
It's more like research-driven. You have the focus, and then that focus informs you.
Great.
Enough?
Yeah.
The
last page.
Oh, you want the last page? Yeah. Well, I'm happy about the common misunderstandings about interpretive methods. One is anything goes. All researchers have their own interpretations, and that's not true. Methodological choices must be justified and they must be consistent. And the transparency of interpretation at all 5 levels needs to be clear. So not anything goes. There will be more ways of making sense of data than one. That's what the first level exercise that I had was to show. So there will be more interpretations than one, but not anything goes. It doesn't go from it's only one to everything. No, it goes from there's more than one to there's more than one, right? So that we can have multiple interpretations, but they all have to be justified and consistent methodologically and explained transparently. There's also the one that I hinted at before, that you can't use questionnaires in qualitative studies. Well, that depends. Depends on the scale of your study and the type of questions you ask. If you ask really open questions, and I'm saying this because I consider myself a qualitative methods researcher, but I have been using questionnaires because I wanted them to be anonymous. And so I'm asked open questions. I also had some Likert questions, but that was sort of for the background of other things. And so you can easily do that. And you can also ask, depending on what the study is and the type of questions you have, you can also ask Likert scalar questions, but you have to be really, you have to use the descriptive statistics thoughtfully. If you have 20 students in your classroom, and 5 of them say yes, that they're very happy about something, and 5 that they're not very happy, you shouldn't say that 25%. Saying that 25% are unhappy is not really, well, it depends on your question, but usually it's not very informative. It's more relevant that there's a spread. Because in qualitative studies, you're usually not interested in percentages. You're interested in how there are different ways of experiencing this and why the different experiences come about. So it's not so much about 25% finding that Google Docs is better than some other tool, SharePoint. It's about why they're experiencing that, and the 25% that the 5 of them that like the other way around, why that. So be careful, and also often the numbers are so small in qualitative studies that it doesn't really, it gives sort of the aura of something much more objective, if you can say that 25%. But if you're talking about 20, or even let's say you have interviews with 5, and then say that 20% meant something, that means that one of the interviewees said it. So be careful with the descriptive statistics. They often do not make sense due to the scale of study and the type of questions that we're asking. And the last misunderstanding is that case studies are not generalizable. And again, that depends on your selection criteria for the case and on your research question. And the Danish philosopher of science, Bent Flyvbjerg, has a beautiful text on 5 misunderstandings about qualitative studies, and this is one of them. Oh, and there's 5 misunderstandings about case studies, sorry. And this is one of them, and he's arguing how selection criteria can, if you have a decisive, a special kind of case that's really exciting. For example, in Denmark, it is like I think in Korea, the digital tools are really, really widespread. And we're thinking about your generation being really good at them. So if in our countries, you have trouble with something, then we can clearly, from that case, even from a classroom of students like you, we can guess, then it makes sense not just to guess, but to argue that in other countries that are less, where digital tools are less prone, less used, they will also have troubles. If the ones most prone to them have troubles, then students less prone will also have troubles.
And with the third one, have you heard of that article? This is what I always give the most. The title of the article is "You Can Generalize Stupid."
Yeah.
Because I think someone got so upset.
Yeah, exactly.
Being attacked all the time. No, you can't generalize.
But of course, you can't generalize from everything. But Natasha, the other point is also, it depends on your selection criteria and on your research question whether you can. Because sometimes I'll see projects from students, but also from senior researchers, where they have whatever case they have, and then they start making more general claims that are not, because of their research question or because of the selection criteria, are not valid. So you can't, it depends. It's not, the question is not you can generalize, or the answer is not you can generalize stupid. Is the question, the answer is you can generalize stupid if your selection criteria are right and your research question is right. And those should be the final words.
Beautiful. Yeah, so I thank you so much. I didn't expect this full lecture on how to do qualitative research, so that was amazing.
Was that okay then?
It was great. Going back to our probably original starting point, I think ChatGPT can't do this yet. So I think I have tried to play around with using ChatGPT for analysis, interpretation. So far, thankfully, it was just very semantic analysis, and that it doesn't really have the ability, I mean, many of us don't have too, but it can't really align with all these things. So if you put your data, I mean, good luck with that, but they will just give you a very common sense themes that you can write. So you can still get the masters, but I don't think that we will call that sophisticated enough to do the aligned research and then make meaningful, insightful interpretation yet. So I think that's probably the one thing. I think before ChatGPT, we have to remember as human researcher, as we learned from Nina today, that this whole thing, which seemingly very overwhelming, I know that I'm worried about some of you don't want to do this qualitative research. However, start from the middle and then try to move back and forth. And then one day, I think you will have aha moment that it makes sense in your little study. But you have to keep learning. I'm still learning it. Some of the things that I'm not confident to say that I know what has been explained today. So be patient. But I hope that this lecture that we got to was helpful for you. And then I want us to, although we're tired and hungry, I know you guys don't look the same now after 4 hours. However, I really want to give the big round of applause to Nina for her super passionate lecture. I mean, you know, the Danish lecture, have you had that before? Maybe not, right? And then again, let's say thank you to both Natasha and Nina once more, and then also to us that you guys did really well today. Thank you.